Today I have an interview with former Xavier basketball guard Brad Redford, who played for the Musketeers from 2009 to 2013. We talked about playing under head coach Sean Miller as well as Chris Mack, going to all three of those Sweet 16s in 2009, 2010, and 2012. One of his favorite teammates at Xavier, and much more. The former Mr. Basketball in the state of Michigan now hosts the Be Different podcast. You can follow him on Twitter at Brad_Redford12. Be sure to subscribe to my channel for more interviews and videos coming soon. Hope you enjoy. Brad, thanks for joining me this morning. How's quarantine holding up for you?
It's pretty good, actually, so far. We're all healthy and safe here, and I couldn't think of anything I would rather do at this point than talk with Paul. So, I mean, this is a special opportunity for me. So thank you very much for your time.
Well, that's saying something if that's what you want to do to spend your free time.
It actually is. I mean, it completely is.
Well, one of the things that I wanted to do today and talking with you is really give fans an in-depth look behind the scenes at Xavier basketball. And you're one of the more experienced players in this Xavier program, a recent memory. You went to 3 Sweet 16s. You were a part of the team from 2009 to 2013. Your injury kept you there for another years. You were around to see a lot of Xavier's best players of the past 20 years, from guys like Tu Holloway, Jordan Crawford, among many, many others, Mark Lyons. And I want to give fans an idea of what those teams were like. You played under Sean Miller. You played under Chris Mack. The differences between those guys and what the NCAA tournament is like. And I'll get right into it here, Brad. What are some specific things that stand out to you as differences between Coach Miller and Coach Mack, specifically in the NCAA tournament, but you can also go general as well?
Yeah, I've gotten the question about Miller and Mack before and the differences or similarities between them. I always felt like there was more similarities between the two of them than differences, especially early on in Chris's career. Because Mack and Miller, they both had the playing background. They both had the passion. They both had the heart. They had similar ways of getting their points across, and they were both player coaches. So, from that perspective, the way that they approached pregame, the way they approached player personnel, actions of the opposing team was pretty similar. And whether it was an NCAA tournament game or a regular season game, they did kind of prepare us the same way. They wanted as best that they could to make it feel exactly the same. Over time, I think, Mack developed his style a little bit more, because I played for Sean Miller only as a true freshman. So I only have that 1 year to look back on. And I played for Chris for an additional 4, and 1 year being my knee injury. But yeah, Chris started taking more chances, I felt like, offensively over time. But in terms of their philosophy, their approach, their detail, there was a ton of similarities between those two guys. And what I will say about both of them is in-game pressure, they both know how to handle it. I mean, there's never a time with either of those guys where you see any panic. As a player, you always felt like both of them were in complete control. You had faith in the way that they prepared and the way they talked to you throughout a game. But as far as like making winning plays, and when it gets to the end of the year in the NCAA tournament, it came down to individual play and, guys making big time shots. Especially when I look back at my time, I mean, the two guys that stick out to me were Jordan Crawford and Tu Holloway, just the way they dominated end of games, and they loved every moment of it.
What was it like playing with those guys and knowing that, for example, I texted you during the Kansas State game watching that and thinking to myself, I wonder what these guys were thinking. And I thought, well, I guess I could just ask Brad what they were thinking during that game. And you saw Frank Martin tweeting last week during the replay of the game that CBS Sports Network was showing, and he was saying, I knew Tu was going to go to the line and make all 3 of those free throws. And Mario Mercurio was saying the same thing. And you just had this feeling watching that game that those guys, and Tu in that situation, Crawford when he hit the shot, Gus Johnson's famous call, you had the feeling those guys were in control. What was it about them that exuded that confidence?
Well, Jordan was just a bucket getter. I mean, we knew whoever we played, I don't care if we played the number 1 pick in the draft, whoever it was, like we had a bucket getter on our team that could get it done. It didn't matter what the coaches drew up. I mean, the plays that Jordan scored on against Kansas State, we had plays drawn up, and then Jordan would just come down, go crossover, in and out, step back, hesitation to hit a three from 10 feet behind the line. So it was like we knew anytime we were playing a quality team, we felt like in our eyes we had the best bucket getter on either team, and that was always Jordan. And for two, he was like the Iceman. It was like, it comes down to the end of the game, free throws, patience, confidence with the ball. Two had that. He had it from when he was a freshman. We even go back to the games in Puerto Rico where we won in 2008. I mean, two hit, I think he was like 13 for 13 from the line against Memphis. And that was him as a true freshman in just his fourth or fifth game. So, those two guys, they supplied us with extreme confidence. And we had quality role players. We had great bigs. We had guys that could shoot the three and just understood their role. So, I mean, I love that team my sophomore year. I think in my eyes, that was probably the best team that I played on. I think you could argue the fight where we lost to Baylor in the Sweet 16, but we got kind of, I think, screwed up throughout the year. It kind of derailed us a little bit.
So you feel like that Kansas State team, the team, I mean, that you guys lost to Kansas State in the tournament in the Sweet 16, you feel like that was your best team?
I do. And I think Jordan kind of just trumps everything for me just because he was such a special, unique talent. Like you can kind of go down the rosters and argue which one was better than the next one. But in my eyes, having a guy like Jordan Crawford on a team with that much talent already just trumped any other team that I was on.
Did Jordan ever talk about his dunk over LeBron in
practice? Of course he did.
Did he ever? What was that like?
I mean, he didn't talk about it in great length, but like we would definitely joke about it. Like, I mean, I love seeing it because it gave him attention before the year too, which you love as a player. Like the more eyes, the more attention on an individual player on your team, the more eyes and attention that's on your team in general. So I mean, Jordan is a character. He's a king of comedy. He's hysterical. I mean, we would make plenty of jokes about it.
Do you guys still keep up as a team? Do you guys still keep up much to this day?
We try to. I mean, social media actually helps at times. There's so many guys playing in different countries and different areas. It does make it difficult. I think half of us are, not playing anymore, and the other half are still playing. So, yeah, when you finish playing that last game as a senior, I mean, everybody kind of starts going their separate ways. And some guys can stay in touch because they're maybe playing in the same league or still living in the same city. But anytime guys come back to Cincinnati, you come back to a game, that's always a good opportunity to kind of reconnect.
One thing that I don't think fans know about or can appreciate as much, obviously because a player is the one living through it, is the ins and outs of the NCAA tournament. When you win a game on Thursday or Friday and you have less than 48 hours to read and react and play another game on Saturday or Sunday, can you take a second and take us through the timeline of what it's like to win a game on the first day of the weekend and then wake up real early the next morning or whenever you wake up and know that you have just that one day in between to prepare? What's that like to go through that weekend of the tournament?
Well, I mean, when you win the first game, the pressure feels like it's off a little bit because no one that gets in the tournament wants to lose game one. So, I think there's a little bit of pressure and anxiety with that initial game. And then once you can get past that one, then things start to settle down a little bit more. At least I felt like that on my end and with the teams that I played on. But yeah, after you win that game, it's media. I mean, everybody wants to talk to you, get some sort of comment or question about the game or what's next. And then, almost immediately we would get shuttled back to the hotel. And then we would go over film of the team that we were expected to play. So if we were in the first game and we were waiting on to see who our opponent was, and we would wait. If we were the second game, then we would kind of immediately go into film. But it really didn't change. Like regular season versus postseason, we always prepare for teams 2 days prior to the actual game. So we would go over 2 days before player personnel. And then the day after, we would kind of go over game actions and do that in practice. So, yeah, you'd play that game. You go back to the hotel. You go over film. The next day, you'd have a full, probably like an hour and a half practice, go over game actions, kind of review player personnel. Then you'd go kind of back to the facility where we're actually playing the game, do a 30 to 35-minute shoot around, do media once again, go back to the hotel, dinner, once again go back over player personnel, game actions, and then depending on when the game was that next day, you do a shoot around or just kind of go right to the game. You'd be there 90 minutes before. So it's a whirlwind. I mean, you have family in town, but there's not really much opportunity to see them. I think when my parents came to the tournament, I would see them for maybe about a 25 to 30-minute stint, like in between games. And other than that, you're pretty much quarantined. It's not the best word to use, but you're pretty much locked in to just, being prepared for that game and being prepared for the moment. So, as cool as it was to be a part of the NCAA tournament, we were there to do a job. We were there to be locked in. We were there to be focused. So it's a really fun time. But it's also, a time where you're locked in and you're focused on, what you want to do.
How much of the game actions and things that you practiced were done in a ballroom, or was it all done in the court?
Well, so like the day before the game, we would do it in like on the court. And then when we'd have like our meeting prior to taking the bus to the actual game, that's when we would be in like more of a ballroom type setup.
In the hotel.
Correct. And then the managers would set up tape. Like they'd set up a 3-point line and a makeshift tee out of, essentially just tape. And then you'd go over all the underneath out of bounds and then review game actions in that ballroom.
And you always get such a kick out of guys like Jay Billis that tweet out the manager videos or the pictures, and you see all this stuff from across the country and these managers that set stuff up. How much does that help being able to just walk through everything like that when you actually get into the game and have that calming sense of mind about you?
Well, there's no time at that point to do anything truly that physical. So, it's just a mental game of getting yourself locked in. So the ability to like have that set up and to be able to prepare and put yourself mentally into the game, even though you're not moving that much, it's huge. And that's where the managers and the scout team, that's when they make a huge impact, because they're putting in, more time with the coaching staff to make sure the players that are in the game understand what they're going to be up against, because you make one mistake on an underneath out of bounds and you go under a screen when you were supposed to go over, or vice versa. And that could mean you win the game versus losing the game. Because once you get to the NCAA tournament and you're a quality team, once you get to the second round, every team is extremely talented. So, you can't afford to make any mistake at all. You have to understand their actions. You have to understand underneath out of bounds. And all of that is so important of mentally preparing and locking into what's going to happen.
And what are some of the differences? And differences probably isn't even the right word because it's just such a completely different world. But when you look at the NCAA tournament versus like the conference tournament or the regular season, you look at the escorts to the game, you look at the media coverage, you have to use the right branded water bottles and water cups and everything. What are some of the differences and how do the logistics work of the NCAA tournament?
I mean, the difference from a player perspective, isn't a whole lot on our end. I mean, there's a bigger microscope on the game itself, and the outside universe is, more excited. But for us, when a game's on CBS or Fox Sports Ohio or ESPN it doesn't matter. The cameras look the same when you're playing the game. So, I think as a player, as exciting as it is, and obviously we want to win and be on a big stage and elevate our program, to new heights. And hopefully one day we can make the Final Four, which is still a pain point for me. But, for us, I think as a player, you're just so locked into getting it done. And you really do try to block out all the noise and all the distraction. And, being away from Cincinnati, being in a hotel, it doesn't make a difference for us. I mean, we're really just locked in on what we're doing. I know it's a little bit cliche, but at that point, what you need to do as a player and you just want to get it done.
Yeah. And now into some of the specific games that you played in. Like I said, you played in 3 Sweet 16s. You played in 2009 and 2010 and then 2012. And in 2010, that's the game, as you were talking about before, Kansas State, that a lot of people can point to as one of the best NCAA tournament games of all time. Certainly Gus Johnson helped elevate that too. But going back and watching the replay of the game last week, there were so many points when you could tell when in timeouts and huddles where you're just sitting there as a fan thinking to yourself, I wonder what these guys are talking about or drawing up. And especially going into those last plays where Two's hitting the 3 free throws or Jordan's hitting that shot from 8 or 10 feet behind the line. How much of that was drawn up versus how much of that, and you hit on it before where you said, Jordan was coming down and just hitting shots, but going into that play where Jordan hits that shot or Two's play where he gets fouled, how much of that is drawn up versus those guys just being such good athletes and basketball players and knowing the situation that they're just taking it into their hands?
Yeah, I mean, it's a combination of both. And I mean, on both sides, because on Kansas State, you had Clemente and Poland, who were tremendous guards. And then you had Holloway and Crawford on our side. So, I mean, it's a mix. I mean, but, really good teams, have an understanding of what players are going to take over at what moment. So, to me, that's what made our team really good at the end of the year. I think we struggled a little bit early on and figured it out. But, the more you play with a guy like Jordan, the more you understand how he operates. So when you're playing alongside him, it's about understanding, okay, when he gets into this position or he comes off this ball screen, Jordan has 3 options. And his first option is going to be to attack and score. And his second option is going to, be to drop down to the big that came off the ball screen or look at Jason Love or Kenny Freeze or Jamal McCain below. And then for me as a shooter, I'm playing corners in space. So if he drives to my side, he's either going to shoot or I'm going to play off of his dribble drive and, hit a shot. So, I mean, the coaches would put him in situations to score, but more importantly, just get him the ball, get him space, and then give him, 3 options to make a play. And for the most part, in that game, it was him individually making a play. And he had an incredible run throughout the tournament. So, we trusted him to make plays. I mean, we've seen him do that over and over and over. And 2 is kind of the same way, right? It was like get him off a flat screen, get him in a position where he can make a play for himself or for somebody else, give him a couple options. And those guys were so good that as a coach, and Coach Mack would probably tell you, it's like, I don't need to draw up a whole lot. I need to get them in space and then get out of their way and let them make a play. And I can't speak for Frank Martin, but I would imagine he would say the same thing. It was, a lot of baseline screens for Poland. It was Clemente coming off ball screens, get those guys in space and then allow your playmakers to go. Because I really think at the end of the year, as much as coaching, we talk about it and, X's and O's that, coaches make throughout the game. Like the players make those plays in those games. It's bottom line because it's going to come down to 1 or 2 possessions, and you have to have a guy that is magnetic with the ball in his hands and makes it happen.
How did the mood swing throughout that Kansas State game?
That was the only game I can remember being a part of where I thought that game was just insane while I was in it. Like most games, you don't think about what's happening in the game until after or even a day or 2 after. That was the only game I can remember just the shots that the guys were hitting. It was unbelievable. It was insane, the shots those guys were hitting on both sides for, it wasn't just, a minute. It was 20 minutes of incredible one-on-one play. It was the last game of that night. So we were the late game. All eyes were on that game across the country. And I remember it. I mean, I was kind of playing, offense, defense for, the majority of those overtimes in the last 5 minutes of regulation. It was just incredible to watch those guys hit shots. And then you would look into the crowd and just everyone was shaking their heads. And it felt like no one should have lost that game. I almost wish we could have stopped the game and then played again the next day. Because it was one of those games you didn't want to end. And as far as losing, you never want to lose a game, but I still look back on that game and it's a cool moment to be a part of.
Now you take a look at that game and then you go in 2012 and make the Sweet 16 again for the 3rd time. And that season was where Holloway took over, beat Notre Dame in the opening round. But also in the same pod, Lehigh goes and upsets Duke. Mm-hmm. Now, we can all sit here and listen to the coaches and everybody, as they should say, it's just another game. We're going to treat it like it's a normal opponent and treat it just like anybody else. But we know, and you all know in the back of your heads, that Lehigh is not Duke.
Mm-hmm.
So when you see Lehigh beat Duke, what are you all thinking?
Well, I mean, it's like as a player, I would definitely rather see Lehigh than Duke. There's no question about it. Because when we were playing in Greensboro, and as a team, we're getting ready to get on the floor, and we're expecting to play the 2 seed Duke. And now all of a sudden, we go from playing Austin Rivers, Coach K, and just all the history and the talent that comes with playing a Duke team, and they end up getting upset by Lehigh. Now we're going on the court, and we know if we win this game, we were playing Notre Dame, we beat Notre Dame, we play Lehigh to go to the Sweet 16. And it's no disrespect to Lehigh, and C.J. McCollum was on that team, but let's be honest, it's going to be easier for us to beat Lehigh than it is to beat Duke. And that's the beauty of the NCAA tournament is, you go from being a 10 seed or a 7 seed to playing maybe, a top 8 team in the country, and then they lose to a mid-major, and you're like, well, I think now we got a better opportunity to beat that team and get to where we want to go. For me personally, those were and even team-wise, those are very different years, because the 2012 year, I had just come off of a knee injury. So I really never felt like I hit my stride that year. And then even as a team, it was different too, because in that 2010 year with Kansas State, we struggled early and peaked late. And then with the 2012 team, we kind of peaked early, struggled down the stretch, and then kind of pieced it together at the end of the year. So, every year, is a little bit different, when you look at it from an individual and team perspective.
Now, you've talked about 2010, 2012, which was both of the Sweet 16s with Coach Mack, but I want to rewind for a second and take a look back at Coach Miller's Sweet 16, where you beat Portland State and you beat Wisconsin, and then you just get clipped in the Sweet 16 by Pittsburgh. What stands out to you about that game against Pittsburgh, and what do you remember? I know it might be a little painful to talk about, but what sticks out to you from that game as your last experience with Coach Miller before Coach Mack took over?
That was probably looking back on it now, the most painful loss of the 3, because Baylor really outplayed us. I felt like talent-wise, they were pretty good too. So that one, I didn't felt like we were ever really in that game like we were in the Kansas State game. But the Pittsburgh game, I really felt like we had control of that game for the majority of the 40 minutes. And we just had a couple bounces, didn't go our way. And then Levance Fields for Pittsburgh he hit a couple incredible shots at the end. But man, yeah, that one was painful. Really cool opportunity, because I was a true freshman at that time and my head was completely spinning with everything that was going on. And to play in Boston in front of that crowd. And we played the game before, it was Villanova and Duke, and Villanova had Scotty Reynolds. I'm trying to remember who's on that Duke team, but it was a really good group of 4 teams. And then to play the 1 seed with Levance Fields, DeJuan Blair, and that group was pretty cool. But man, yeah, Levance Fields kind of took over at the end, and we just made some mental mistakes the last 5 minutes of that game that still kind of stick in my head, unfortunately.
What sticks out, if you could get into that a little bit?
I remember there was one turnover where I think Derek Brown stepped out of bounds, and it was like his foot was barely over the line. That took away a possession from us. And then Levance Fields hit a really tough shot over Dante at the top of the key. And then I remember with about 45 seconds left, we were down 1, I believe. And we turned the ball over. I think BJ and I were kind of crossing at the top of the key, and somehow we lost the ball, and then Levance Fields got a hold of it and got a bucket. And those were the mistakes at the end. We just put ourselves behind the 8 ball a little bit. I think if we would have taken care of the ball just a little bit better, we would have come out on top in that game.
I remember I was 12 years old, and I was down in Florida for we took a vacation for the Nationals spring training that year. Mm-hmm. And we were sitting on the runway. I think there was 45 seconds left, and whenever it was a 1-point game, a minute left, whatever it was. And my dad, this was pretty much before smartphones. He's got his BlackBerry refreshing the feed, and we took off with a 1-point game and a minute left. So we were
Mm-hmm.
in the air for 2.5 hours. And I remember sitting there going, oh, I wonder what's going to happen when we land. And we landed, and it didn't turn out that way. But
yeah,
that was
one
a
was
tough game.
painful. That one was painful. And I felt like we had such a good team that year too, and just really good depth and a connected group. And and then it ended. It ended, and then you go back, and then Sean leaves for Arizona. Chris took over. Derek Brown went to the NBA, and like all of a sudden, it was like, man, what happened to everything that we had? I mean, we still had a great year in Chris's first year, but if Derek Brown would have stayed, for that run, that Kansas State year, that team would have been, obviously even better than what it was.
Yeah. When you guys got the news that Sean was leaving, what was the general reaction there?
I mean, it was disappointment. I mean, because, as much as the assistant coaches recruited us, every player, goes to play for the head coach that's at that university. And, our expectation was that he was coming back. And we felt like he would, because that was his most talented team. In our eyes, we felt like that group was the best group he had ever had. But hey, money talks. Arizona came in with a lot of money, and I mean, I think ultimately that was why he decided to leave. I mean, it's like the difference of, I don't know what he was making at Xavier, maybe over $1 million, 1.5 at that time, maybe a little bit more than that. And then you go to Arizona, you're making over $3 million. So I mean, the decision for Sean to leave Xavier, I don't think it was a decision based on talent or where we could go as a team. It was strictly a financial decision in his mind. I mean, and I can't fault him for that. If I, could triple my pay and, not make just money for me and my family, but generations, like I would probably do the same thing. So I think we understood it, but there was disappointment. But it's a business. College basketball is a business, and you get used to it. And, we could go in a deep debate on how that works for college athletes. But at the end of the day, like as an 18, 19-year-old, you have to figure out it's a business pretty quick and look out for yourself. So, to me and just the other guys, it was like, just, look out for yourself. And, I love Xavier and ultimately felt comfortable with Chris and the players that we had. And I was like, all right, I'm just going to roll with it and see what happens.
How much have you kept up with Coach Mack since he's gone down to Louisville?
We'll text here and there, but we both gone our separate ways. So I mean, we connect, probably a couple times a year, but I'm sure he's disappointed that his team didn't get an opportunity to play in March, because I felt like his group was one of the best teams in the country.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. One other thing I wanted to talk about here before we get into your career a little more is the 2013 team that finishes 17-14. And a lot of people this year compared that 2013 team, not necessarily the product on the court as far as talent goes, but just the finishing record over the last couple of seasons, where so many fans have grown accustomed to the success that Xavier has. And when you go 2 years without making the tournament, or maybe you make the tournament this year, we'll never know, but you have 2 down years in the eyes of Xavier fans. And you look at that year for you, where that's your final year at Xavier in 2013, and you've made 3 Sweet 16s, and then you have this year where you completely fall off the cliff and you don't make the tournament, and you come up 3 wins shy of 20 wins. What's the most important thing to remember as a fan when you're watching those games and you're thinking to yourself, the coaching staff's got to have a direction here, but there's some frustration because there's this pedestal that you feel like the Xavier program is at that they're not reaching right now, but it's because they're building the talent and a new coaching style. And Chris Mack inherited that, and he got Jordan Crawford, he got Tu Holloway and Mark Lyons. He got those guys, and then those guys left. He had to rebuild the program. It took him a while, but eventually he gets a number 2 seed and a number 1 seed and an Elite 8 in 3 straight years. So it just takes some time. But what's the most important thing for fans to remember through that?
Well, it always feels like more panic on the outside than it does on the inside. I can say that for sure. And then winning and losing is so close. It is. And, my senior year when we went 17-14, this year when you look at a team that more than likely probably wouldn't have made the NCAA tournament if there was a selection. But it's a matter of, I think my last year we lost 12 games and they're 5-point games. And we didn't make enough winning plays in the first 10 games to give us a chance to get in the NCAA tournament, as an at-large selection. Just like this year, there's, 5 games that, I can probably think of where if Xavier wins those games, or if Xavier goes to Providence and then beats DePaul, which they probably should have, that's an NCAA tournament team. And then the narrative of the season is a complete 180. If we beat DePaul in that first round of the Big East tournament, I don't think people are as up in arms. So, I think those two things are, what come to mind at first. I think the frustration more with this year as opposed to 2013 was that we only missed the tournament that one year. And we had lost over 90% of our scoring going into that year. So you had guys that really had, played very low minutes. And now all of a sudden they were thrust into a star position or a starting position, so that was where we struggled early, but you could see the progress laid. And then ultimately I felt like that year kind of helped build a foundation for what Xavier did the next 2 to 3 years, which I think is true when you look at, the record and who played that year and how well Xavier did in years after. The frustration with this year is because you have 2 years where you missed the tournament and you had almost all of your scoring come back this year. And that's where the frustration is different. And I can understand that. I do feel like, and I felt like this year we had a core that, didn't live up to a consistent standard, which a lot of people expected. And, hopefully that changes next year. And I think it will. And, the Big East too is just, it's such a brutal schedule. And if you don't have a team that, is top 2 or 3 in terms of their talent, it's going to be a roller coaster ride. And you saw that with this team. And not having a primary ball handler to control the tempo and the pace at the end of the games just crushed us. I mean, it just did, because it thrust Najee into position to make more plays than what I think he was comfortable with. I mean, phenomenal player, but just, not a guy who the last 2-3 minutes of a game that I want to have the ball in one-on-one isolation situations all the time. That's when I want to get the ball to Jordan Crawford, or I want to get it to, a guy like D. Davis, who's a sure ball handler, not necessarily the scorer like Jordan was, but that's a guy that has comfortable with the ball in his hands, and he's going to make a play for himself, or he's going to make a good play for somebody else. We didn't have a guy like that. So when you look at the core 4 that was coming back, it just didn't end up, turning into a player that was consistent as a leader with the ball in his hands. And if Xavier doesn't figure that out next year, it's going to be the same thing. So, if that player is Paul, if that player is Kiki, Dwan Odom, like someone has to take the keys as a primary ball handler and be the leader in those last 5 minutes, because so many games come down to the last 5 minutes. If you don't have a killer or a guy that wants the ball and can handle it, then you're going to end up, looking on the outside of the NCAA tournament. I mean, it's just reality of, where we're at, as a program, where every team is at that's in the top 75.
You mentioned D, you mentioned Jordan, two, those guys. Who were some of your favorite teammates that you played with over your career at Xavier?
Well, I loved all my walk-ons. Those are my guys. I thought my best teammate in terms of like leadership, commitment to the team, understanding of personalities was CJ Anderson. I mean, I loved playing with CJ. He was tough. He was physical. Weeze was the man. I mean, he was an enforcer. I mean, he's a Cincinnati legend. He cared so much about the team. And for Weeze, it was never about him. And, he couldn't shoot outside really 15 feet, but he would guard the best player. Everyone knew he had to get to the rim. He'd still get to the rim. If there was ever an opposing player that was messing with anyone on our side, Weeze would let him know and take care of it. And it was just, he was a phenomenal guy to play with. And, for me, I played with him as a freshman, sophomore. He was kind of a guy, for me that I appreciated being around every day.
Yeah. You, as your personal career, you come off of Mr. Basketball in Michigan, and you come to Xavier, and you're lighting it up as a 3-point shooter. And you mentioned how you looked at your career and your mentality on the court, but knowing that you were going into the game as a guy that was going to space the floor and open things up and just be pretty much automatic from beyond the arc. What's your thought process going into the game, knowing the just acute specific role that you're out there to fill?
Well, I didn't want to be a specialist at first. I mean, that was not the
What
that
did you
was
want to
not
do?
I wanted to, I mean, everybody goes to like to be the man. Like everyone that comes, everyone that gets a scholarship and goes to a school, like they want to end up like, if not being the man, they want to like play their whole game. So when in high school I scored, in AAU I would score in every way, and then to get on the court, like that was my only way to get on the court as a true freshman. So I just kind of like took that as a badge of honor. But keep in mind with like the recruiting at the time, like I was being recruited and went to Xavier. It was just me, Mark Lyons, Brian Walsh at the guard positions, and then there were some older guards as well. But ultimately, that was it. And then when Calvin Sampson got removed from Indiana, that brought in Jordan and two. And I was already on campus at that time. So now that class went from me, Mark, Brian at the guard position. Now you add Jordan too. So, I mean, we kind of knew, at that point, I knew I was like, man, this is going to be challenging. So true freshman year, got through it, made an impact shooting. And then sophomore year when Jordan, was eligible to play, we all knew he was the best player. So it's like, and I kind of got used to that at Xavier. When you play at a program that's that high level, they're going to keep bringing in guys that are NBA caliber talents. And every year I played at Xavier, we had an NBA caliber guard. And then, I mean, ultimately after my sophomore year, after I blew my knee out, it kind of like put me in a position like of, I was a little bit unsure of like what direction to go. I had thought about transferring. I had talks with the coaching staff about leaving, going to another school, whether a, more of a mid-major program or just a different high major school with a, different roster, maybe a more, open offense rather than a more ball screen isolation based offense, which we ended up running the majority of my time. But ultimately decided to stay. Then I blew my knee out and kind of just, I ended up just, buying into that role. I loved playing that role at Xavier. Looking back, it was the best decision that I made. But, there's indecision as a player. It's like, should I keep going on this road or should I maybe, go for a fresh start? And, ultimately Xavier has been great. And I kind of just enjoyed that role of being the shooter on a big time team. And I love playing at the Cintas Center in front of the fans. And I still live in Cincinnati now. So, I mean, ultimately it turned out great, but it didn't start wanting to just be that, but it ended up working out okay.
And you see players that have worn the Xavier uniform that are just so invested in the program. And you yourself, you were the on-court host for, was it just one season or was it more than one season?
I think I just did it the 1 year. I might have done a couple of the second year, but I only did it like full time, I guess, the 1 year.
But even still now you host the pregame show up at Duff's with Andy Mack, and you've been around, you have your podcast, you're producing a lot of content for Xavier and its fans. What is that investment in the program and the school that still now, all these years later, after your playing career is done, you're still putting the X on and you're still representing the brand and you're still fully invested in what Xavier meant to you?
Yeah, I mean, Xavier will always be a big, part of my life. And, I am appreciative of the opportunity that I had there. And I have a belief in Xavier and the mission of what they've done and the progress that, a school like Xavier has made over the last 2-3 decades is unprecedented. And it's such a unique culture. And I know that word gets thrown around all the time, but like when you're a Xavier fan, it's like you have, a bond and people really care. And, that's important. Those relationships and the impact, Xavier for me is important. And I want to be a part of the rise of Xavier and I want to be front row when we get to the Final Four. So for me, it's an investment of, supporting a program and being around and being available. And, I love the relationship that I have with the school. So I don't foresee that changing anytime. And, I'm a big fan of Travis. My first year at Xavier was Trav's first year at Xavier. So I've known him for years, and just, I love the direction he's taking us. I'm looking forward to a big year from them next year.
And one last thing about the games before we get into something a little different. Are there any specific moments that stick out to you from any of the games any of the NCAA tournament games, really? But if there were other conference games, any big moments that stick out to you where you're talking to the guys on the other team? And you mentioned how you knew when you were in the Kansas State game that you knew it was crazy while it was going on. But are there any moments where you can remember, standing there talking to Pullen or Clemente or any of those guys? I named those two off the top of my head, but any team in any game that you remember everybody interacting and going, guys, this is crazy.
I loved beating Dayton at home. I loved it. Like we've beaten Dayton at home so many years in a row, and it was such a good rivalry. And we don't play it right now, but like I loved that game at home. And you have all the presidents, the past presidents that we beat Dayton through, and like it was just like we'd always get into a scuffle with them at half court at some level, and then we beat them every time. And it was that game. I love that game, and I wish there was some way we could bring that back because it's such a good rivalry and both sides love it. And but the beatdowns of Dayton at Cintas, I enjoyed those. And then senior night was a good night individually. So we had just come off beating Memphis, who had won like 20 straight games, and then we were playing St. Louis, who was a top 20 team. And although that year we didn't have the record that we were hoping to have, it gave us a little bit of indication after, you beat a team like Memphis, who had, was one of the hottest teams in the country. And then we pull out an overtime win on senior night versus St. Louis. And I hit a shot in both games, like under a minute, to kind of turn the tide a little bit. So that for me was a kind of a special moment of getting over the full hump of the injuries that I had and finishing it out. That was kind of an important week for me with both of those games.
So we've talked a lot of basketball. Now we get into
switching subjects here, man.
We get into the quarantine a little bit. What are you doing to stay busy?
So, so my fiance and I we're in the process of closing a house. So that's been number one. I've been working as needed. I've been working like everybody else, but Breaking Bad, I had never watched it before. I'm in through season 5 right now. I'm about 3 episodes in at season 5. I've enjoyed it, but it is intense, and Walter White is starting to drive me nuts, man. He's driving me nuts.
Yeah, well, he's a perfectly designed character. He goes through the whole thing where he just wants a little bit of money in the beginning, and then he just gets greedy, and he realizes he's his own boss, and he's the master of everything, and he just takes over, and he can't let that control go.
Yeah, he goes from a chemistry teacher, it's made $40,000 a year to, being one of the biggest meth dealers in the friggin' world, and turns into El Chapo. So it's just it's been a wild ride. So I am gonna finish it, but I have to admit the intensity of it. Like I've had dreams of meth and Walter White, and it's just I was gonna watch it last night, and I was like, I need a break from Walter. I'm gonna get back to it this evening.
So what else are you doing to stay busy? Anything else?
It's a good question.
Been watching TV? It's
a good question. I'm not typically a reader, but I found myself reading a little bit. So yeah, I think that's going okay. I don't know how much I'm retaining, but I'm at least acting like I'm reading.
Mr. Rose would be proud of you.
Yeah. I found myself going on a few walks. Yeah, Sister Rose would be surprised that I even own a book. let alone reading any of the actual pages in it. But no, it's been, as bad of a situation it is, and I feel for everybody on the front line and in hospitals. I hope everyone's taking opportunities to be with family and organize and getting their stuff together. And I don't want to be the one 5 years from now saying I was anxious and wish I would have taken more time to, talk to the people that are close to me. So I think there's a lot of people that are taking the time to connect with friends and family. And so I've been doing that as well. And it's an uncomfortable situation for everybody, but hopefully some people like what we did today. I don't know. Hopefully it provides a little bit of a relief to a degree from looking at the news. I can't look at the news like nonstop. I'll get my 30 minutes of coronavirus talk, get up to speed with everything. And then I can't go down the rabbit hole. I did it like a couple of weeks ago, and I won't do it again. I'll know what I need to know, but taking the proper precautions and being careful and doing that stuff, of course.
Well,
crock pot meals too. Crock pot meals. I got.
Oh yeah, that was dinner last night.
Yeah, I've been throwing some stuff, and I might do some spare ribs in the crock pot tonight. So.
Oh man, got a grill situation, or are we just
no?
inside?
Just you throw it in the crock pot. You just throw it in the crock pot. Put the spare ribs in there. Put a little open pit barbecue sauce in there. Let it go for about 6 hours. And
what are the sides?
Well, microwavable corn.
Okay.
Maybe some freezer broccoli. Some Uncle Ben's rice that heats up in 90 seconds. So
always solid.
Yeah. So I mean, the Uncle Ben's is key. Although it's getting harder to find that at the store right now. It is. Uncle Ben's there's nothing there. It's like vanished from the aisles.
It's so easy to make. It's dangerously easy to make.
Dangerously good. So Uncle Ben's, keep up the good work, man.
Brad, thanks so much for joining me today.
All right, brother. I appreciate it, man.
Appreciate it. Hope you enjoyed that interview with Brad Redford. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Be sure to like this video, leave a comment for who you want me to talk to next, what you want me to talk to them about, and subscribe to this channel for more content coming soon.